Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be joining you as part of the Beyond COP26 Virtual Summit. My name is Emily Sonwa Sandgren, and I'm the Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance, or ESG, at Trimble. So I began my role at Trimble just over 9 months ago, actually. My career in sustainability has spanned academia, civil society, and now the business sector. And I've worked on a variety of sustainability issues, including climate and water, equity and inclusion, and human rights. For those of you who aren't familiar with Trimble, I thought I would provide just a brief introduction. For over 40 years, Trimble has been advancing innovative technologies in positioning, modeling, connectivity, and data analytics, and in order to provide insights, optimization, and ultimately transformations within industries that shape our everyday lives. Trimble's solutions help customers connect the physical and digital worlds to help solve complex industry challenges around the world. I like to think of us as the best kept secret in sustainability. So I've come to you today to share with you a bit about Trimble's sustainability journey, including how we're defining our role in transitioning to a net zero future, the day-to-day implications this presents to our business, and how you might apply the learnings that I want to share with you to your own journey. I do not pretend to be an authority on this by any means, but rather I'm a passionate practitioner, and I'm eager to share my thoughts and learnings in the hopes that it demystifies the work and sparks action. Simply put, we know the why and what of climate change. Our resources and efforts really need to be focused on the how. How do we move fast enough and at the scale we need? Before jumping into the how, I thought I would quickly take us through my thoughts on the why and the what to get us all on the same page. So for me, the why is grounded in the concept of planetary boundaries, and the acknowledgement that businesses are inextricably linked to whether we can live within these boundaries. And I argue that business plays a significant role in our ability to achieve this. So let me share with you what I mean by planetary boundaries. I happen to love this graphic that depicts it. It's called the donut, and it's meant to show how the three dimensions of sustainability, the environment, society, and economy, are a part of an integrated and interdependent whole. So I'll briefly walk us through the image. The outer ring represents our ecological ceiling, which recognizes the Earth is comprised of finite resources. The inner ring represents the social foundation, and that recognizes that humans have the right to a certain standard of well-being. So the donut itself, that light green portion, represents our economy, and that recognizes that an economic system can only really work as long as it does not lead to planetary degradation or human deprivation. So our goal is to live within the donut. So how are we currently doing in regards to the balance this donut represents? So we're not doing so good. Specifically, our current economic system is pushing us beyond our ecological limits and pushing us below the ability to meet people's basic needs and rights. So our inability to live within our planetary boundaries is not just a problem to be solved by governments and civil society. I argue that business must also play a significant role. It's why we're all here and attending this conference to really dig into that. I just wanted to share with you this graphic because I find it really interesting. It hones in on the concept of value creation for a business, and that what kind of value a business creates really matters, and puts that squarely in thinking about business's role in society. So the graphic is depicting the evolution of thinking around how business perceived its role in relation to society and the environment, where in the past, businesses didn't have to think or care about its impacts on society and the environment, as long as it was creating a profit. That middle part of the diagram is really offering a depiction of the first stage of evolution, where businesses began to recognize that there's some overlap with the environment and society. It led them to think about and start to measure their impacts on society and the environment. The diagram to the furthest to the right really shows the current evolution of thinking that recognizes and calls out that business is wholly dependent on society and the environment, and that its success or failure in the long term relies on this greater context. So let me be clear. I'm not asking businesses to be something that they're not. I'm asking you to think about the true context within which your business operates. For me, it opens up so much opportunity for a business to do what it's meant to do, which is bring solutions to market. And this is where for you purpose comes into play. Why does your business exist, and how does that serve stakeholders beyond shareholders and pure profit? And even if you're in maybe your early stage in articulating this kind of purpose, from a pure risk opportunity perspective, it's clear that the broader environmental, social, and economic context has a direct effect on both business risk and opportunity. And therefore, it just makes good business sense to not just be aware of that, but actively acting on the risks and opportunities to your business. And in the case of climate change, we know that assessing and acting upon climate-related risks and opportunities are an essential part of our business. Okay, so I walked us through the why, hopefully relatively quickly. I'm going to quickly get us through the what. So if we agree that business has a critical place within our ability to live within that donut that I showed you, then the question becomes, what must we do? This slide might seem a bit overly simplistic, but I've found in my experience that when I want to talk about the what, it's really important to acknowledge and establish the fact that business has an impact through everything it does. And those impacts can be both negative and positive, and they can exist simultaneously as a result of our activities. So to be clear, having an impact is not a choice. The choice is actually in what actions you take based on your impacts. And the business opportunity is in how we use our strengths and capabilities to create value that drives the kinds of impacts that lead to sustainable outcomes. All that is to say that what we must do is decrease our negative impacts and increase the positive. So let's look at this through a climate change lens. This rainbow graphic visualizes the current imbalance of the Earth's carbon cycle. On the left-hand side, you can see the levels of emissions going into the atmosphere and the sectors responsible for those emissions. And the right-hand side shows where carbon is coming out of the atmosphere and where it's being stored currently. Given this imbalance, it's clear that we need to decrease the negative impacts of our actions by reducing the emissions going into the atmosphere and increase the positive impacts of our actions by increasing the amount of carbon we can remove and store. So this spells out the most basic level of what must happen in order to mitigate climate change. So I've managed to boil down what to do about climate change to what seems like a really simple mathematical equation. But as we know, if it was as simple as that, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. So what do we do? In essence, we must transform away from business as usual and make the leap to a decarbonized future. Simple, right? It's now up to businesses to seek out the opportunities this leap presents and act as a driver of innovation that can step up and push solutions to climate change at the speed and scale we need. I put this graphic up because I wanted to make a quick mention to say that I highly recommend reading the report, The Exponential Roadmap. That's where this graphic comes from. And additionally, I've learned a lot from the organization Project Drawdown, both of which have put this transformative leap into clear and actionable steps for business. Okay, so let's finally get into the how a business can deliver on this mandate for a sustainable future. So where is Trimble in all of this? As I shared in my introduction, Trimble is a technology company serving critical industries that support our everyday lives. Because our technology helps these industries optimize for productivity, efficiency, and safety, it results in benefiting sustainable outcomes by reducing inputs like fuel and fertilizers and by decreasing waste like preventing construction rework. These benefits have been the basis of our sustainability work, but the job ahead for us is not to rest on our laurels, but to continue to take an innovative, proactive approach to driving a sustainable future, which has required us to more deeply understand how we can have an impact. So this is a busy slide, I realize. I'm going to walk us through it pretty quickly. But in essence, what I'm trying to depict here is that impact is dependent on taking action along three different levels. So I argue that we can take actions that address the impacts of our own footprint, so our own direct operations and that of our value chain. We also can take actions that extend our impacts to enable others to address their own footprint. And this is often called your handprint. We can also take actions that set a broader blueprint and therefore extend to an entire industry or economic system. This conceptual model helps me not only understand how we can have an impact, but also how I can shape that impact through deliberate actions. Okay, so even if we can identify the levels of impact we can have, it's still agnostic of the direction and ultimate goal of that impact. So I personally like the Three Horizons framework because it acknowledges that if we want to change from business as usual, then it requires disruptive innovation. What I also like about this framework is how it acknowledges that there's always elements from our current business as usual that are actually worth continuing. So it's not necessarily advocating for throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it is asking us to think hard about what kind of future we need, and that to get there, it will require us all to take a hard look at business as usual and have the courage and innovative wherewithal to take the kinds of actions that will transform what we know and do today into a viable future. The future we're all discussing at this conference is a decarbonized one, which we know requires us to deeply challenge our business as usual. Okay, so how do we do that within our own business? Before we get into talking about how we're doing that at Trimble, I just wanted to pause for a moment and share with you my philosophy on corporate sustainability. For me, sustainability isn't about implementing a tack-on program to our current way of running our business. Rather, we need to think about sustainability as the way we do business. And that means that sustainability is as much a mindset and design principle as it is a set of actions. And for most businesses, that will require their own transformative journey as a culture. And that doesn't happen overnight. So what does that look like for Trimble? So for Trimble, it's been about recognizing and enhancing what we already do well. That's been our starting point. So I know I've told you our mission, or I've told you a bit about our work, but our mission is to transform the way the world works through our industrial technology solutions that connect the physical and digital worlds to help solve complex industry challenges around the world. So we have already set a clear purpose for ourselves. This is what we've always done. But right now we're in a moment of really focusing our attention on looking at how much and how fast our innovative solutions can enable that transition to the Horizon 3, or that decarbonized future. And for us, that really represents our handprint opportunity space. So in the example on the slide, our work in providing precision agriculture solutions has significantly reduced inputs like water and fertilizers, as well as the fuel used to run the machinery. And therefore, the negative impacts resulting from agriculture are being reduced. What's next for us is to really ask ourselves, how are we enabling a food secure future while facing the dual challenges of feeding a growing global population while not degrading the natural resources on which we depend to produce this food? So for us, this means that we are framing how we design our solutions so that we're meeting the needs of our customers' whole ecosystem, including their own customers, their land and other natural resources, and their surrounding communities. So for us, it's really been about widening the aperture of our understanding of the problem, pain points, barriers, and the role we can play in solving for them. So I started with the handprint because that's what we already do really well and are digging into even further. But let's take a moment and go back to the footprint concept, or our direct operations and our value chain. So in some regards, for Trimble, we manage our own footprint through excellent adherence to compliance and regulations. But as we know, what's been happening in this space is that expectations are growing faster than compliance and regulations, and therefore that floor is constantly rising. So in the case of climate change and climate action, the expectations of our customers, our employees, our investors, all include the need for Trimble to address our own carbon footprint, even if, relatively speaking, it's small in comparison to the impacts we can have through our handprint or through a blueprint. So we've spent the better part of this year going through the process of setting science-based targets, and we're currently in the review for approval process with the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Our reasoning behind setting science-based targets is actually pretty simple. For me, it's the best way to ensure we are doing our fair share to reduce our emissions in line with the Paris Agreement to keep global warming levels under 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's also a highly rigorous process that helps you to uncover and understand your impacts and where you are best suited to make significant reductions, thereby establishing a clear roadmap of action. And for us, that's been true. We have been able to set a clear roadmap of action over the next few years to be able to accomplish our targets that are suited to who we are as Trimble and the types of differences that really matter. I would also add that setting science-based targets has co-benefits. It helps us to establish greater credibility in this space by showing that we're walking our talk. It allows us to use our own technologies to enable our transition, and it also engages employees in meaningful and tangible efforts that represent for them a greater purpose and goal that we can all rally around. I'd also like to add what comes next for us. So we're waiting for our approvals for our science-based targets, but we will also be kicking off efforts this fall to begin aligning our disclosures to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD as it's often referred to. For us, this is going to allow us to build on the targets by embedding the assessment of climate-related risks and opportunities into our business planning processes, which further reinforces our ability to pursue handprint solutions. Okay, so when you've acknowledged and taken action in the footprint and handprint space, it's natural to think about how you can scale that to a level beyond your own direct reach. I think of the blueprint space as setting the enabling conditions for impact at scale, which most often requires action in a collaborative, sometimes pre-competitive space. So the examples I've given so far in the handprint and the footprint has really been focused on Trimble and Trimble alone. But where to start in this collaborative space can often feel daunting. And in my experience, you can start by identifying a shared industry-wide pain point that has to be solved in order for you to be able to compete. This sets you up to have a common agenda with partners, but doesn't prevent you from eventually competing at some future date. You can also start from something that is working on a smaller scale that you believe can and should be scaled. But that scaling requires partnership and efforts beyond your own business, and therefore you need to take on partners. I've included on the slide here the UN Sustainable Development Goals because when I think of setting a blueprint for sustainable outcomes, I think about the common global agenda for sustainability that is reflected in these goals. These goals aren't designed for one business to take sole action to achieve, but actually require systems change with all systems actors, including business. So for Trimble, this is where we have a lot of opportunity. For us, it's about stepping outside of the bubble of our own business and taking action where we can amplify and accelerate change through collaborative partnerships in service of driving the broader global agenda for sustainability. So what I want to leave you with is this. We need leadership now more than ever before. And you need to ask yourself, what kind of leader do you want to be? And this is ultimately about setting your ambition level. There's no right or wrong answer, truly. It's just what's right for you and your company. For us, Trimble is humble to its core, and we face the desire to be leaders, but also the tendency to stay in the background. But we also know that we can be at the front of the pack and still remain true to our values, and that's really what we're pushing ourselves to do. I'd like to convince you all to be at the front of the pack with us, but I recognize that's not always possible. What is possible is to acknowledge where you want to be in that pack and build your leadership agenda from there. Okay, well, I hope that by sharing with you some of Trimble's sustainability journey, I've provided you with either some new ways to think about this work or at least validated the work you already have underway. I want to thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the Edinburgh Napier University for holding such an important summit. I wish you all well.